Hi, everybody. I've got a lap full of chocolate and fluffy, and it actually is sort of funny because Brad and I, this whole afternoon and for the last hour was think pink elephants, think anything, because when Fluffy and Dear Chocolate, usually when they see the lights come on, then they turn it into a game. Well, maybe the frequencies on Earth are turning more positive. We are hearing about vaccines. We're hearing about various new breakthroughs in a lot of directions. And the kitties, they seem to hang around tonight really to be picked up. As you can see, they are docile and they did not have any gamesmanship. And I really wanted them to be in my lap tonight because we are getting into that holiday season where all of us wish that we could be with our loved ones in so many different places in the United States and around the world. And COVID is still raging, and that it is the most wonderful thing to be able to hug these dear furry souls and know that at the other end of just getting through the timeline and vaccines and maybe other things coming, that we can begin to feel some spring out there where there may be some kind of normal life again. But in the meantime, I am just so glad that Chocolate and Fluffy are here tonight as we're heading toward a kind of strange holiday season. I love them so much. I know how much you love your dear creature furry souls, your photos and your emails and letters. And I guess it is wonderful to be able to celebrate life that we love at a time when so much has been uncertain. So, thank you, Fluffy. Thank you, Chocolate. I love you. I'm going to put you down so I can pick up my papers. Oh, you were great. And they just undid my bow. Well, I mean, what would life be like if it wasn't spontaneous? Well, listen, I want to thank all of you. My Earthfiles YouTube channel has broken through 155,000 subscribers, and let's keep that number rising. There is no cost to subscribe, but a growing audience means a lot to me and to YouTube. So please share your enthusiasm for this Earthfiles weekly broadcast with your friends and family and neighbors, and let's work toward another champagne celebration. Now, together around the world, let's head for the spring equinox on March 20th, 2021, and let's break through to maybe at least 175,000 subscribers. That is one of my most favorite days of the year because we in the Northern Hemisphere leave winter and go into spring and summer. I know the Southern Hemisphere is going into winter, but it's holidays and transitions. And up here in the Northern Hemisphere, that means more sunlight and flowers and those glorious miracle hummingbirds. And hopefully by then, the newly announced Pfizer vaccine that is described as safe and 90% effective against SARS-CoV-2 will be helping more and more people everywhere to defeat the horrible coronavirus. COVID is spreading more rapidly now than ever before since the nightmare began a year ago. Much of Europe is back on lockdown, and yesterday, November 10th, 2020, Italy locked down a lot more of the country because the pandemic keeps getting worse there. And here in America, case counts in most states keep rising, breaking records, as total cases now exceed 10 million. COVID cases in the United States over the past week have averaged 123,315 cases a day. That, ladies and gentlemen, is an increase of 69% from the average only 2 weeks earlier. This country's COVID death count is now more than 240,000, and various governors are warning that hospitals are soon to be overwhelmed. We need medical breakthroughs as fast as possible, and this new one, could a nasal spray prevent coronavirus transmission, was announced last week on November 6 by Columbia University's Irving Medical Center in a press release. Medical researchers at Columbia University have developed an antiviral lipoprotein nose spray that has stopped the COVID-19 coronavirus in its tracks in the nostrils of ferrets. Ferrets breathe in viruses through their noses and become infected just as humans do. Columbia University reports that the coronavirus replication was completely blocked. The nose spray interferes with those COVID pointy spikes that you see in this electron microscope picture. Those are real coronavirus COVIDs. And when those spikes go into our ACE2 receptors, they can open up human cells. This new spray that has been worked on the ferrets that can get infection just like humans, it has stopped. Now, how did this work? Well, the scientists sprayed the noses of 6 ferrets, and then they divided into 3 pairs placed in 3 different cages. Then into each cage, they put 2 ferrets that had been given only a placebo. And finally, ferrets infected with COVID-19 were put in those cages. 24 hours later, inside the 3 test cages, none of the ferrets that received the nose spray had caught COVID-19. But every one of the ferrets that had only placebos were infected with the coronavirus. Not only did that nose spray completely protect against all strains of the pandemic coronavirus in cell cultures, the lipoprotein is inexpensive to produce as a freeze-dried powder that does not need refrigeration down to the very cold of the new vaccine. This can be easily mixed with sugar and water when it is in this white powder form, the lipoprotein, and distributed around the world to poor countries that don't have refrigeration. The only real downside is that the nose spray lasts only 24 hours against COVID, so this would be a daily spray, but it would stop COVID. Until a vaccine is available everywhere, this nose spray, developed with the help of these ferrets, could be a really valuable new weapon to fight this horrible pandemic. We need all the help we can get, and you can read more about this at my news website, earthfiles.com. It's the current top story. Now, 2 weeks ago, on October 28th, 2020, Miami, Florida's CBS station Channel 4 and Orlando's NBC station WESH Channel 2 both had headlines about, quote, mysterious orb caught on camera in Florida pastor's home, close quote. The pastor is 52-year-old Ford Monzell, who has a biblical science degree from Liberty College and Seminary in Florida. For the past 4 years, Pastor Monzell has been the head chaplain for the Daytona Beach Police Department. This year, to better protect his home, Pastor Monzell purchased Ring security cameras for indoor-outdoor wired monitoring. The Ring model he bought is shown here. It works in both infrared and visible light, depending upon the darkness or brightness of the rooms being monitored. In the early morning of September 29th, 2020, 5 weeks ago, Pastor Monzell's cell phone woke him with a motion detection alert from this Ring camera on his printer at the back of his living room. And what he saw in the Ring live feed images were moving, glowing orbs in his living room. He was confused watching on his cell phone back in his bedroom because he could see that there were these moving, glowing orbs in the cell phone live feed. But when he went out to investigate, he could never see the orbs with his eyes. He could only see them on the cell phone. Recently, Pastor Monzell talked to me about the Ring camera live feeds of moving, glowing orbs that he received on his cell phone over a 5-hour period from his living room between 3:30 and 8:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Well, it was on the date of September 29th at 3:30 a.m. is when I first received a notification from my Ring camera that was located in my living room. I viewed the movements, and it was then that I noticed an orb hovering in my living room. I was very startled, intrigued, trying to wrap my mind around what exactly it was I was looking at. My wife was here. I was the only one home during this time.
The sound of the notice is what?
It says motion detected from your living room is the sound that comes through my phone. Automatically goes to the image, the live feed, once I click on it.
So at 3:30 a.m., that text message from your system came in on your cell phone. Is it normal in those first 4 seconds?
Yes, it was. And the room itself was completely dark other than the night light that was to the right underneath the TV, which is also what that reflection is that you see on the TV. The night light only comes on when it's completely dark. And to the left by the plant is another night light that's plugged into the walls.
What color are the night lights?
LED white.
The Ring is infrared.
It is, because the room is completely dark. So what you can see is infrared light. That is correct. The blanket that you see draped over my couch is black, but yet it appears to be white. Inside my bedroom, while I'm watching this on live feed, I was contemplating if I should investigate. I have Alexa. So from my room, I gave the signal to turn on all my lights in the living room. So they came on automatically when I commanded it to come on.
And that yellow then is a product of the infrared, like the chartreuse on the LED lights.
Yeah, the infrared clicked off and went to the normal lighting of the camera.
So it would go from infrared then to normal daylight?
Well, it went to normal lighting because the infrared was no longer needed because there was sufficient enough light for the camera to image it.
Because you were able, through Alexa, to have all of the lights come on.
That is correct. You will also notice that lamp on my TV, you can see the reflection of the lamp light, but you can no longer see the reflection of the night light that was plugged into the wall because the night light went off because it's not dark no more. The night light only comes on when it's completely dark.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, an orb is no longer visible.
Pastor Monzell's second Ring video begins at 6:29 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. You can see an oval orb on the very first frame in front of an artwork of Christ next to a lion. The lion image with Christ expresses his controlled, majestic power as described in the book of Peter. You can see that the sofa blanket is white, meaning this is in infrared. It seems to touch the fan and moves up and out toward the left hall entrance as the TV suddenly comes on in pure white. And then, in the left hallway, a bright light casts yellow. There is a loud click and a change to normal visible light, and the blanket goes black on the sofa. And now the TV becomes louder as Pastor Monzell opens his bedroom on the right to come out to the living room for the first time. Pastor Monzell appears with a cell phone in his left hand that he's looking at, and in the right hand he is carrying his gun. He faces the TV in the living room. He walks forward in his bare feet, looking around the room. Another click, and a purple color, and you can clearly see the gun in Pastor Monzell's right hand. And then he backs up toward the Ring camera with the gun in his right hand. He speaks to the computer. The reply of her voice is not clear. He backs up more toward the Ring camera. You can hear him say, "Computer, turn on the light," and the yellow fills the living room. And then the room goes to normal, and the blanket is black again.
Now, when I looked at my live feed, realized it was there, but I myself could not see the imagery, the orb, while looking in the location that shows on my live feed. And that's when I really started thinking there's something else here. In my mind, I'm thinking this, whatever it is, consistently triggered my motion detector. You have to have some type of physical presence in order for my motion detector to be tripped. And I don't have it on a sensitive setting. It has to be some type of strong movement to capture it. So in my mind, I'm thinking if I come out here and if it's strong enough for me to see it on my camera, I should be able to see it with my eyes. However, I did not.
And Pastor, at any time did you see any translucent oval light anywhere in your living room?
No, not at all. That's what's so crazy about this. I, with my own eyes, have not seen anything, but we're seeing something on this camera. And that's what's fascinating, that's what's intriguing, and that's what I'm trying to figure out. What was it?
Please talk to me about the One Ring infrared tape in which this translucent oval seems to split into three.
I'm watching this live feed from within my room. At first, I'm still just seeing the oval, which was pretty much almost at the very top of the ceiling. I have vaulted ceiling, so it's right on top of the ceiling, right above where the fan is coming out of the ceiling. I see what looks like to be a light, just a ball of light, come down from the same area, the ceiling, and then it had like some type of tail. Then it started to kind of become more defined. It begins to break off into two different splits. And when it did split into two different parts, the orb like almost came down to meet with them in the middle of my room, and then all three exited back up out the left side of my ceiling altogether. And it was at that point I was like, no, this is something else. There's something more to it now. There is just nothing I could even come close to imagine to try to make my mind convince me of what I just saw. Especially about when, you get a lot of people say, it's just a spider web, or it's an insect, or it's some kind of dust particles. No. That is the most intriguing thing about this whole thing of what that is. I desperately want somebody to try to explain to me what that was. I'm not going to say I was fearful, but I was extremely taken aback. But when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, what is that? What just happened here?
Pastor Monzell emailed me 6 links to his ring camera recordings of those moving orbs. I had never personally seen anything like the large glowing oval that seems to emit that smaller one that came down and split into two, and then the large oval seems to come down and rise up again, and so that there are three things moving, and then they all seem to disappear through the ceiling. So I wanted professional feedback from one of the best video and image analyzers that I know, Daniel Drayson in San Francisco. Dan has helped me immensely through at least the last 2 decades to separate the wheat from the chaff when it comes to videos and images. He is always very, very critical in a professionally good way. So when he says something is worth following up, I pay attention. Here is Dan's October 29th email to me after I asked him to look at Pastor Monzell's ring camera recordings. Hi, Linda. Well, this is an intriguing phenomenon. Here's what I'm seeing. First of all, we always need to be careful of assuming that something we see in a photo or video is an object. There are many possible visual and optical effects such as lens flares, shadows, blooms, reflections, refractions, diffractions, and so on. And they are not actual objects. So until we can establish that something is a true object, it's best to keep our descriptions neutral. For example, a patch of light with such and such characteristics. In this case, the camera registered this patch of light, but the camera never sees it reflected in the TV. So it is not an actual bright object in the room. It is not a light projected on the walls and ceilings because it does not change shape as it appears to move from one surface to another. It is apparently never seen by Pastor Monzell, meaning with his eyes. Its brightness, in additional observations, its brightness is proportional to the camera's sensitivity at any point in time. Higher sensitivity in lower light. It never sees the patch of light when the room lights are on full, and the patch is fairly dim in the early morning light. The orientation of the patch of light remains absolutely constant, about 45 degrees from horizontal. This would be consistent with the behavior of a lens flare caused by a light source located to the lower left of the camera's field of view. Its movement would be caused either by slight movements of the light source or slight movements of something reflecting the light source. Now, with all that said, I have no idea what that light source might be. I believe the camera itself includes a light source below the lens, but there may also be a light source of some kind on or near the desk to the lower left. As for the movement of the light patch, its quality is somewhat like that of dust floating in the air, but that's unlikely due to its repeated approximate position. The only thing that I can think of in that ballpark might be a spider web wafting to and fro with normal air currents. And it could also be paranormal. In other words, the light source and its movements could be paranormal. The visible effects, including the apparent split into 3 parts, are not beyond what lens flares are capable of, but I must say that these are quite unusual and my jury is out. If I can think of anything else, I'll let you know. Meanwhile, if Pastor Monzell can stand in the middle of the room, a few feet this side of the lamp table, take a photo of the corner of the room where the camera is located and send it to us, that might provide some additional clues. Cheers, Dan. So I asked Pastor Monzell if he would take photos that showed where the ring camera was on the printer, and he took half a dozen. including this one that shows the living room foreground and the Ring security camera sitting on top of the printer. And here is Dan Drayson's final comment after looking at Pastor Monzell's photos of the Ring camera on the printer. Quote, "Please thank Pastor Monzell for the photos. On first examination, I can't find anything that would account for the anomaly, least of all its quality of motion. Perhaps a benevolent spirit came to say hello and made itself visible via his Ring camera," close quote. So that is a genuine mystery to Dan Drayson, and that really, knowing everything that I know about how critical he is, that is saying something about Pastor Monzell's Ring recordings. Now, I would like very much to learn from you guys. If any of you have Ring or security or wildlife cameras, anything like that would have infrared and visible light ability, or if any of you in military and in intelligence, any of you, has anyone ever seen anything on infrared like is in Pastor Monzell's recordings? And I would like to hear from any and all of you, and for those who feel that they want to communicate in a private way, you can reach me through Proton Mail, you can reach me through FedEx, you can reach me through hard mail. And then if it is in general that you want to communicate because you have some information that might help, you can email me at earthfiles@earthfiles.com. That's my always general email address. I'm very interested to know, upon seeing the Pastor Monzell videos, if any of you have ever seen anything quite like that before. And I also, in this whole issue, as Earth mysteries continue to emerge in so many ways from so many different directions, and we are all beginning to understand that our academic history of Earth and human evolution are so very different than the true history of extraterrestrial biological manipulation of this planet and our solar system. I want to share with you a recent email I received on October 29th, 2020, from someone named M.R. "Hi, Linda. I'm going to relate an incident that occurred in 1959 while I attended Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. I was majoring in industrial design. We were required to have a science course, and I chose earth science. My professor was Howard Nechemkin, a highly acclaimed chemist. I'm guessing he taught the rather simple course at Pratt Institute for some extra money. Now, I did some research on the name, and here's what I learned. Professor Howard Nechemkin passed away on October 27, 2003 at age 85. Dr. Nechemkin was a college professor at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn before serving as professor and then chairman of the chemistry department at the College of New Jersey, formerly Trenton State College in Trenton. He received his bachelor's degree from Brooklyn College and his doctorate in education from New York University. He was also a Fulbright scholar, having taught as an exchange professor in Frankfurt, Germany. Dr. Nechemkin co-authored the Sham's Outline for Organic Chemistry, which was translated into many languages and is still in use today. Here is what M.R. shared from his Pratt Institute classroom experience with Professor Nechemkin. Quote, Well, it was a beautiful spring day with blossoms filtering in. As much as I love astronomy, my mind was on a hammock, swaying in a light breeze. The good professor was rattling off the planets and their attributes when he paused at Mars. He then exclaimed, quote, "We all came from there." The class came out of our stupors. "Professor, could you elaborate?" Quote, "In 1943, myself and several other scientists met with FDR, that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States, to discuss the matter. So what happened?" Quote, "The meeting was top secret, and I should not have mentioned it." And with that, he went on with the lecture, and the class ended. Close quote. I found that to be a fascinating, and as far as I'm concerned, highly credible insight from 1959. And what is so important is to realize that coming out of World War II and into the 50s, our government and government scientists knew a whole lot more than any of us could ever have imagined. 5 years ago, in 2015, PH.D. nuclear physicist John Brandenburg released a book entitled "Death on Mars: The Discovery of a Planetary Nuclear Massacre." It's about government secret data that Mars had a civilization 1 million or so years ago that was destroyed by 2 hydrogen bombs deliberately set off in the atmosphere above the region known as Cydonia. On page 340 of his book, Dr. Brandenburg writes, quote, "The Cydonian hypothesis and new Mars synthesis require a long-lived biosphere on Mars and also its sudden death, given Mars' present state. We must maximize knowledge of how and why Mars died, apparently a humanoid civilization dying with it," close quote. And the implication is that's 2015 knowledge. The MR experience in that classroom in New Jersey that goes back to 1959 is with a chemist who apparently had had a meeting with probably FDR and others that we have heard about, and that even then they were discussing that Mars was the origin point in this solar system for humanoids that include Homo sapien evolution on Earth. I thought I would share that with you to think about, to ask questions about, and that on the other side of tonight, that's Mars ETs. But we're in a universe that every month now, it seems we are getting more and more science papers about there being other dimensions. Allegedly, there's an experiment that they're going to try at CERN to see if they can generate little tiny black holes, and that if they had a certain specific exquisite measurement, they could literally report that they were able to access the dimension that is somehow lining this universe. And there we get into the context of the question, are those orbs that seem to have sensitivity to the environment and interest and can accelerate and slow down and seem to have curiosity, maybe even curiosity about the lion and the Christ and the fan and the ceiling hook? Are they from another dimension, and that they can come in for a time and then they go out and back in and back out? And could something like those orbs that Pastor Monzell got on his Ring camera. Could they be something that would be like a monitor, the orbs that have been reported around the world for centuries? Could they be monitors from another dimension? And that came up with a group of scientists in the 1990s when I was invited to join a group in Hessdalen in Norway. And that was when they were studying what would be moving orbs of light. And I saw with my own eyes that we would be up above the tree line. Literally, where we were was that you're looking down on the trees, and above were these huge rocky outcroppings of the mountains. So that from our eyes looking at the mountains, we're not looking at organic life on all of the rocks. The trees are here and below. And yet, we would see a pulse of light, a motion of light, and then a pulse of light down here, and a pulse of light over here. And we were able to, some of the scientists working, to capture some of those lights in their cameras. And there was one of those lights while I was there that generated a high temperature for 3 hours. And when we went back to where we were all staying, we would go back to sleep with shades down because it never got really dark. It was more like twilight at that time of the year when we were there. And so everybody would sort of stay up, and you might take a short nap, but there was lots of these conversations that we would have when we got back because nobody felt really sleepy in the kind of sun twilight of that time of the year. Well, in one of those discussions that I was having with a professor, Mastrioni, from Bologna in Italy, he said that he was becoming convinced that these were, in Hessdalen, plasmas that had been programmed with zeros and ones, the way we would program a computer, had been programmed, and that his suspicion was that they were uplinking and downlinking information from something unknown that had the ability to create plasma orbs that could exist among the trees or up in the rocks, absorbing whatever information they were created to absorb and sending it back to somebody else. And I bring that up tonight because that's like a big box in which something like the moving orbs in Pastor Monzell's videos might be some variation on what we saw in Norway. And that the idea that in the universe that we're in, that there has always been some kind of interaction that might fall into the category of interdimensional penetrations. I find that to be one of the more intriguing subjects, in some ways more interesting than the obvious that we're not alone in this universe, and that this universe and so many other universes are involved in some kind of a cosmos that is so huge, with so many dimensions. And I find it exciting, and I hope you do too. And in that whole huge context, from the macro down to the micro, I would love to know your comments and questions tonight. Peggy?
Hi, Linda. First, I'd love to thank everybody for their super chats. So thank you, Demonic Hordes, Moonbird, Rachel Rizzo, Sonia, Vicky Martinez, Old School Shinobi, Lori Ann, Isabella Pachetti, Stan Kozlowski, Minnesota Folk, Milena Macer, and Leo Zabo. Thank you, everyone.
And give Peggy a hand. Wow, your names are so creative and so wonderful. I wish we could all get in some big, huge convention center and all meet each other and talk about these glorious subjects. Well, let's go with Peggy, whatever you think is the best question to start out with.
We had a great question asked earlier in the show. Someone would like to know if you know of any phenomenon that's associated with either CERN or the Large Hadron Collider.
It was about a month ago. I had a private conversation with a physicist who is very interested in working on equations having to do with this concept that if CERN can generate mini black holes, that they might be able to use them to prove once and for all another dimension. And it is not fantasy. It's being worked on, papers. Now, having said that, I know that one of, let's just say, one of the village stories that is out in the world is that if CERN tried to, or was in the process of trying to create mini black holes, that something terrible would happen. As far as I know, that's not physically feasible. But what is a very interesting question, and this physicist and I talked a little bit about this. If there are other dimensions, and that we on Earth, in a hard physics way, are getting to a point where we might actually be able to document data that would relate somehow to the existence of another dimension. It's like a whole new corridor opens up that is hard physics. All of the centuries, whether it has been religions, whether it has been secret Masonic and Rosicrucian and those kinds of groups, to the works of philosophers, there has always been this theme that in the large box of God, or the divine field as I prefer to think, the divine field is all that can ever be through infinity, that there is a relationship between something that is so far beyond the matter world that we have these names for it, and some groups have even said that they must remain unnamed in honor of their divine infinity, but that the relationship as it has been taught on Earth so far is that the human has a soul that is related to the divine field, and that soul is involved in machinery, a recycling machinery. Is the recycling of the soul at the moment of death, is it confined in some way inside of this universe? Or is the truth that has been, it seems to me, always described in religious literature and philosophy, that the soul must leave this matter universe, go into another dimension that has been called heaven or hell or purgatory and a lot of names, that it can be different frequencies, different layers from positive to negative, and then experience something, and then at some point recycle back into this matter universe or another. So from my point of view, what is happening at the end of 2020 with increasing papers and speculations about are we in a holographic universe, Could CERN be able to access another dimension through mini black holes? All of it. We are literally getting to a place where it's acceptable physics and science inquiry into other dimensions, other timelines, holograms, all of the subjects that once upon a time would have seemed sort of untouchable. And now that it is clear that this one matter universe is not the end-all be-all of anything, I think it's becoming clear. Some people could argue it's not proved, but I think it's becoming clear, the work is pushing that way, that being in one universe, in a huge cosmic, we've been comparing it to the island of sand, and every grain is its own universe separated by other dimensions and other timelines. It's becoming so exciting in a mental, provocative way that I'm finding myself feeling almost bored about when are they going to tell us we're not alone in this universe. And that comes back full circle to a brilliant chemist who had a meeting with FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in 1959, like the descriptions of a meeting between President Eisenhower and throughout the decades going back from here to World War II, that there have been government leaders, military leaders, scientists who have known, maybe face to face with other intelligences, working on this planet. And the whole discussion has been the true nature of the history and evolution of the creation of the humanoid life form here on the Earth, what really happened on Mars. Was Mars the source in this solar system? But that Mars came from Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 via Sirius and the stories that are out there. So it's an odd confluence that is beginning to happen at what seems to be a critical decade in the 21st century, no matter which way you look. The 2020 to 2030 seems to be destined. This is a decade destined for revolution. Revolution at every level. And it's almost like now we could all do ourselves a favor and say, get the reins in your hands and hang on, because this is just 2020, and look what we have been through. Well, I am so curious to keep knowing what will keep unfolding for the rest of this decade, that I hope that we can keep gathering here on Wednesday nights, sharing more and more and more, because I just think this is an exciting time to be alive, even when something as horrible as COVID and political unrest and all of the things that are getting us stressed have on the other side, to me, it's like it's churning up into excitement, real excitement of discovery. And I hope that a lot of you will try to concentrate on the excitement of discovery of what's happening every day and not let the drone of TVs get you down. So, Peggy, what about another question?
A viewer would like to know if you could tell us what you would know to be the earliest documented interaction or sighting of what we would call a typical gray alien with a big head and large black eyes.
Brad was just handing me a very important note, and I'm going to have you ask the question again, but he's absolutely right. In the words that I just said, that what on this day of November 11th, 2020, I should add, is huge salute, respect, hug, honor of all of the men and women who have fought in various military battles for this country over the decades, and how much we owe to you, those who have had the courage to go out on to battlefields in order to help keep this country, the United States of America, whole. We love you. Past, present, and future, we love you. And we honor you. And thank you, Brad, for giving me that note. And now, Peggy, would you rephrase that? Would you say that question again?
Linda, a viewer would like to know, can you tell us what you know to be the earliest documented interaction or sighting of what we would call a typical gray alien with a large head and large black eyes?
I think it is England. It is in one of my books. It's the large-headed Lem, I think, was the name. And at the time, I don't know that it was considered to be an extraterrestrial. This is one of the whole issues throughout history. When you have in Europe the stories of elves, gnomes, were those little gray artificial intelligence? Because if you start by how are they described, the grays? There are about, I don't know if I can see, about 2 foot, and they have been referred to in history as dolls. The Matilda book from allegedly a nurse in Roswell referred to them as dolls, and that they understood, through the military understood, someone understood that these little short gray things, that they were artificial intelligence of some sort. Well, so they had that insight a long time ago, but over the decades since World War II, in the 1947 period, it's so clear whether you're talking with people in the human abduction or you're talking about people who have been in intel or military, and they will say that they know that there are, if it's 2 foot, there are 3 foot, 3.5 foot, 4 foot, we're getting up to about here. And when you are in that 4 foot, all of that, no matter what the size, the way I've understood it from several people, even those that have had face-to-face in a military operation, it's artificial intelligence. Maybe very sophisticated, that I don't know, but that it is AI, not organic intelligence like we humans would think of each other. But then, when you get up to the 5 foot, 6 foot, when it comes to the grays specifically with the dark eyes, which I believe are lenses, 7 foot, as far as I'm concerned personally, I think that the tallest I've ever heard described of the tall, thin grays is about 7 feet as compared to the praying mantis, which can be 8 or 9 feet tall. Some, occasionally, the tall whites are described as being between 7 to 9 or 8 to 10 feet tall. But the tall, thin grays, it was 4 years ago, I was working with an Army sergeant that some of you have seen my conference presentations about binary code that he was receiving at night. It was driving his wife crazy. He had notebooks to write down the zeros and ones. When I began working with people who could translate We found that it was having sentences that you could translate. And in reaction to one of my conferences, I think somebody came to me or sent me an email and said, I think what he has drawn, the military man has drawn, that are the beings giving him binary code, is called an emerther, E-M-E-R-T-H-E-R. When I did a computer search, I was intrigued to find that the day that I received that information, that there were 2 or 3 illustrations about a tall gray being called an emerther. And the problem that we all have is if you go into Wikipedia or you do a search and you come up with something like this, whether it is illustrations or alleged photos, there's not one shred of hard evidence that would hold up in a court of law. So the most any of us can do without having government confirmation that there's a huge variety of extraterrestrial biological entities. They come in different sizes, different colors, different shapes, different agendas. We can talk around and about what military and intel people have shared. But it isn't hard proof. So I think in some ways that this question does go to the heart of a very important issue. When did the first alleged gray show up? And I think it was in England, and I know that I should have the history on the tip of my tongue. It's in one of my own books, along with a drawing that tied to the description of a teenage girl who, it was the Judy Doherty and her daughter Cindy, and they were abducted together in a yellow beam of light in a UFO, and the mother and daughter both saw grays about 4 feet high with some kind of instruments excising tissue from the testicles, the tongue, and the eyes of a calf that they had seen in a beam. And the being that they saw on board, Judy, the mother, drew, and the daughter drew. They were definitely in the category of the grays. When I was working with that case, it ended up in my book, An Alien Harvest. The image that they drew provoked people to send to me this 1800s drawing, which I should recall exactly where that came from. But if that's true, if it goes back to another century, then it would mean and reinforce that the intelligences that we are trying to understand today in the 21st century have been on this planet for a very long time, and that it reports and reinforces what I have been putting in my work for 40-some years, that the beings that are doing the animal mutilations and the human abductions have a program of harvesting genetic material, and they must be creating something out of all of that material that they periodically gather, and that they are directly related to the source of the manipulation of already evolving primates on this planet. Coming full circle, we exist because of non-human manipulation and terraforming on Earth. And with that, Peggy, I am going to wish everybody peace, more love and light in this difficult time, and hope that we all can keep moving forward with the excitement of how much new is breaking around the chaos that COVID is causing. And that next week I'll have something else special. I know something I'm going to be doing in about 2 or 3 weeks that I think will be amazing. And I hope that you all will let me know if you found the Pastor Monzell strange orbs to be as interesting as I do, and if you have any information about what it could represent. I would love to hear from all of you. Help us get from 155,000 to 175,000 by the spring equinox, and our family on Wednesday nights can continue to grow and grow and grow, and I would love that. And I love you.
Turn on closed captions for YouTube videos by clicking the white CC button on the lower right. The default language for Linda's videos is English. If you would like to see the captions in another language, click on the white settings button next to the CC button. Select Subtitles CC, and then select Auto Translate. Select a language, and the captions will now appear in that language.
Sort of gone through, and they will hold their heads. I never had a cat do that before. And they'll pull against the comb, helping me get out snarls. And I think it's the best they've ever been.